Well, good morning, and thank you for this very humbling experience to be here today. What a great topic, and since I've got 10 minutes, I'm going to get started. There's a lot of hand-wringing today about the supposed collapse in U.S. demand for EVs. I think the numbers may tell us a different story. In 2023, U.S. EV sales topped 1 million units for the first time ever. The fourth quarter saw a 46% year-over-year increase in sales, and in 2024, sales are forecast to grow between 20 to 30%. EV sales are the fastest growing segment in the auto industry. To paraphrase Mark Twain, I think the death of EV demand is being greatly exaggerated. Of course, EV adoption rates will ebb and flow, as happens with all paradigm-shifting technologies. However, OEMs understand what they need to do. They need to address range anxiety. They need to compete against Chinese pricing. They need to expand EV charging stations so that, in the words of Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares, one is staring you in the face no matter where you go. And finally, they need to ensure that the availability of sufficient critical minerals sourced as locally as possible. And this last point is the one I want to focus on today. The future success of electrified transportation and our clean energy transition hinges on critical minerals. Not to be too dramatic, but so does our national defense, our economic future, and maybe to some extent our freedom. To underscore this point, let me tell you the story of Dave, who works for the U.S. Defense Logistics Agency. Every day, Dave and his colleagues work tirelessly at analyzing the global supply chains for virtually all critical and strategic minerals. For example, they forecast what happens to the supply chain for niobium if a severe weather event hits a certain producing region. Why? Because that certain producing region produces over 92% of the worldwide demand and needs for niobium, and none is produced in the United States. Or they examine the technology and military readiness of a scenario under which a bilateral trade dispute spirals out of control and cuts off supplies to the West. If you think this is unrealistic, let me suggest we talk about germanium, gallium, and graphite, all restricted by China in the last 12 months. Or they game out the consequences of a conflict in Eastern Europe that disrupts the supply chains for critical minerals such as titanium. If this scenario rings a bell, it should. We're experiencing that supply chain pressure right now as a result of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. One day, Dave and his colleagues complete yet another scenario analysis, an export embargo of rare earths by China. The basic facts are these. China overwhelmingly dominates global rare earth mining and processing. The U.S. produces rare earth concentrates, but virtually no separated rare earths. Australia produces some, although most of its products are already destined to Asian customers. There's virtually no other meaningful supply alternatives, and most of the rare earths have no viable substitutes. Finally, they realize it takes years and sometimes decades to get a new rare earth mine up and operational in the United States. The conclusions of this analysis were very grim, so much so that Dave and his colleagues strongly recommended that the United States stockpile rare earths as soon as possible. And by the way, the Department of Defense has now done that. Because of the classified nature of these analyses, and the impacts are not really publicized, however, based on our industry experience, here are just a few things the United States would not be able to produce, use, or replace if China cuts off rare earths for any extended period of time. Let's start with high-efficiency electric motors and actuators that use rare earth magnets. Think of smart munitions guidance systems that become dumb. Think of multiple small rare earth motors in vehicles today, both EVs and internal combustion engine models, where up to 14 such motors are needed in one car seat to meet our expectations for comfort. Here's another, perhaps, sorry about that, my multi-layer ceramic capacitor chip is working well. Here is another, perhaps less well-known example, a multi-layer ceramic capacitor chip. Your smartphone contains about 1,000 of those chips, and although it certainly works well right now, it won't work without those chips. Neither do computers and most other electronic systems. How about LCD and electronic displays? Beyond your TV, your smartphone, or your laptop screens, think of the F-35 pilot who depends on rare earths to enable the heads-up display in their helmet. Or lasers, including the high-powered versions now being deployed on naval ships for anti-missile defense. The list goes on and on. In fact, it's difficult to find a major defense, clean energy technology, or electronic system that doesn't depend on rare earths. So what is the likelihood of this scenario actually playing out? Regrettably, I see a rare earth export embargo by China as a near certainty within the next several years. Not necessarily because of a trade dispute between the U.S. and China or hostilities over Taiwan, although both are certainly possible if you listen to the news. I believe China will soon need to consume internally all of the rare earths it can make. So let's do some math. China is the world's largest producer of EVs. Its current market trajectory suggests that by 2030, about 15 million Chinese EVs will be produced each year. The average EV requires about 2 kilograms of magnetic rare earths. That means China will consume 30,000 tons per year of magnetic rare earths to meet this internal demand by 2030. And that's just for EVs. China manufactures many, many other goods that also use rare earth permanent magnets. Indeed, the ratio in 2022 was about 84% for all other uses and 16% for EVs. In 2022, China produced rare earth magnets containing a total of about 58,000 tons of magnetic rare earths. In order to meet its own demand for EVs by 2030, China will need to increase their total production of magnetic rare earths upwards of 35% versus the total they produced in 2022. This increase doesn't account for that other category called other uses, which is very, very large and also growing at double-digit growth rates every year. This is not easy to do, even for China, but it probably explains why, over the last 50-plus years, they have invested many billions of dollars across their entire rare earth supply chain, and why they have built the world's largest and most advanced industrial base, R&D infrastructure, highly skilled workforce, including over 6,000 PhDs, and other assets devoted solely to rare earths and their applications. It also helps to explain why China has aggressively invested in prospective rare earth mines all around the world. A Chinese state-owned enterprise even buys and ships to China the rare earth concentrate now produced in California. All of this begs a fundamental question. What can we do to mitigate this threat? I can think of many policy initiatives, but let me mention 3 today. Number 1, where additionality exists, the U.S. should provide debt guarantees, and even equity financing to mining companies that can produce rare earths and other critical minerals. Here I would note the innovative leadership of the U.S. Export-Import Bank and the Department of Defense. In particular, EXIM's Make More in America initiative, a first in the bank's 90-year history, is going to make a huge, huge difference. Indeed, EXIM has expressed interest in providing debt financing for our NioCorp critical minerals project in Nebraska. Thank you, Chairperson Rita Jo Lewis, for your courage, your vision, and your leadership in this regard. Number 2, we need to employ meaningful tax and other direct financial incentives to encourage the development of full mine-to-magnet supply chains here in the U.S. Just as the U.S. realized that leadership in semiconductors is critical to national security through the CHIPS Act, there are now several bills in Congress targeting such assistance for critical minerals. And number 3, we need to ensure that government permitting is conducted in a thorough but efficient manner. Applicants must get permitting answers more rapidly and with much more certainty. On this final point, I should note that NioCorp has already obtained all the necessary federal, state, and local permits to start construction. And the takeaway here, I think, is that good projects coupled with good engineering and strong ESG principles can secure the required permits in the U.S. successfully. In conclusion, I suggest we need to stop pointing fingers at China. We need to realize that China made, over a long period of time, and continues to make smart investments to achieve its critical mineral dominance today. While China's top-down industrial policy won't necessarily work here in the U.S., there are many important lessons that we can take away. So let's get to work making decisions and investments now to secure the critical mineral building blocks for the future of the United States and our national security. We can't afford to fall further behind. Thank you very much for your time today.